How to Learn a Foreign Language by Edward Granville Browne. From Chapter 1, Introductory, of A Year Amongst the Persians. Read for the LibriVox Language Learning Collection, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Now, having unburdened my mind on this matter, I will recount briefly how I came to devote myself to the study of Oriental languages. I was originally destined to become an engineer, and therefore, partly because, at any rate 16 years ago, the teaching of the modern side was still in a most rudimentary state, partly because I most eagerly desired emancipation from a life entirely uncongenial to me, I left school at the age of 15½ with little knowledge and less love of Latin and Greek. I have since then learned better to appreciate the value of these languages, and to regret the slenderness of my classical attainments. Yet the method according to which they are generally taught in English public schools is so unattractive and, in my opinion, so inefficient that had I been subjected to it much longer, I would probably have come to loathe all foreign languages, and to shudder at the very sight of a grammar. It is a good thing for the student of a language to study its grammar when he has learned to read and understand it, just as it is a good thing for an artist to sketch a figure or catch the expression of a face. But for one to seek to obtain mastery over a language by learning rules of accidence and syntax is as though he should regard the dissecting room as the single and sufficient portal of entrance to the academy. How little a knowledge of grammar has to do with facility in the use of language is shown by the fact that comparatively few have studied the grammar of that language over which they have the greatest mastery, while amongst all the Latin and Greek scholars in this country, those who could make an extempore speech, dash off an impromptu note, or carry on a sustained conversation in either language are in a small minority. Then, amongst other evil things connected with it, is the magnificent contempt for all non-English systems of pronunciation which the ordinary public school system of teaching Latin and Greek encourages. Granted that the pronunciation of Greek is very different in the Athens of today from what it was in the time of Plato or Euripides, and that Cicero would not understand, or would understand with difficulty, the Latin of the Vatican, does it follow that both languages should be pronounced exactly like English, of all spoken tongues the most anomalous in pronunciation? What should we think of a Chinaman who, because he was convinced that the pronunciation of English in the 14th century differed widely from that of the 19th, deliberately elected to read Chaucer in the accent and intonation of Chinese? If Latin and Greek alone were concerned, it would not so much matter, but the influence of this doctrine of Pan-Anglican pronunciation too often extends to French and German as well. The spirit engendered by it is finely displayed in these two sayings which I remember to have heard repeated. Anyone can understand English if they choose, provided you talk loud enough. Always mistrust an Englishman who talks French like a Frenchman. Apart from the general failure to invest the books read with any human, historical, or literary interest, or to treat them as expressions of the thoughts, feelings, and aspirations of our fellow creatures, instead of as grammatical treadmills, there is another reason why the public school system of teaching languages commonly fails to impart much useful knowledge of them. When any intelligent being who is a free agent wishes to obtain an efficient knowledge of a foreign language as quickly as possible, how does he proceed? He begins with an easy text, and first obtains the general sense of each sentence and the meaning of each particular word from his teacher. In default of a teacher, he falls back on the best available substitute, namely a good translation and a dictionary. Looking out words in a dictionary is, however, mere waste of time if their meaning can be ascertained in any other way, so that he will use this means only when compelled to do so. Having ascertained the meaning of each word, he will note it down either in the margin of the book or elsewhere, so that he may not have to ask it or look it out again. Then he will read the passage which he has thus studied over and over again, if possible aloud, so that tongue, ear, and mind may be simultaneously familiarized with the new instrument of thought and communication of which he desires to possess himself, until he perfectly understands the meaning without mentally translating it into English, and until the foreign words, no longer strange, evoke in his mind not their English equivalents, but the ideas which they connote. This is the proper way to learn a language, and it is opposed at almost every point to the public school method, which regards the use of cribs as a deadly sin, and substitutes parsing and construing for reading and understanding. Notwithstanding all this, I am well aware that the advocates of this method have in their armoury another and more potent argument. A boy does not go to school, say they, to learn Latin and Greek, but to learn to confront disagreeable duties with equanimity, and to do what is distasteful to him with cheerfulness. To this I have nothing to say. It is unanswerable and final. If boys are sent to school to learn what the word disagreeable means, and to realize that the most acute misery and that the most assiduous labour, if it be not wisely directed, does not necessarily secure the attainment of the object ostensibly aimed at, then indeed does the public school offer the surest means of attaining this end. The most wretched day of my life, except the day when I left college, was the day I went to school. During the earlier portion of my school life, I believe that I nearly fathomed the possibilities of human misery and despair. I learned then, what I am thankful to say I have unlearned since, to be a pessimist, a misanthrope, and a cynic. And I have learned since what I did not understand then, that to know by rote a quantity of grammatical rules is in itself not much more useful than to know how often each letter of the alphabet occurs in Paradise Lost, or how many separate stones went to the building of the Great Pyramid. Many of my readers, even of those who may be inclined to agree with me as to the desirability of modifying the teaching of our public schools, will blame me for expressing myself so strongly. The value of a public school education in the development of character cannot be denied, and in the teaching also great improvements have, I believe, been made within the last 10 or 15 years. But as far as my own experience goes, I do not feel that I have spoken at all too strongly. End of How to Learn a Foreign Language by Edward Granville Browne. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Recorded in London, England.